I still remember the day I held my first baby in my arms. She was so tiny. Her fingers wrapped around mine, and for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to love someone more than myself. I looked across the hospital room at my husband, waiting for him to come closer. Instead, he stood by the window, staring outside. I smiled at him. "We're a family now," I whispered. He didn't smile back. At the time, I thought he was simply tired. The first few months were difficult. I barely slept. My days became a cycle of feeding the baby, changing diapers, cleaning the house, and trying to recover from childbirth. I was exhausted, but I was happy. My husband, however, began changing. He came home later and later. He stopped asking about the baby. He stopped asking how I was feeling. Whenever I tried to talk to him, he would say, "I'm tired." "We'll talk later," but later never came. One evening, after putting our daughter to sleep, I sat beside him on the couch. "Are you happy?" I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. "I don't know," he said. My heart sank. "What does that mean?" He sighed. "I don't think I want this life anymore." I stared at him, trying to understand what I had just heard. "You mean being a father?" "No," he said. "Being your husband." The room became completely silent. I felt like the air had been taken from my lungs. "What did I do?" I whispered. He looked away. "I just don't feel the same anymore." I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted him to take those words back. Instead, I looked toward our daughter's room. She was sleeping peacefully, unaware that her parents' world was falling apart. A few weeks later, he asked for a divorce. I begged him to think about our family. I reminded him of the promises we had made, but he had already made his decision. The day he left, I stood at the door holding our baby. He kissed our daughter's forehead. Then he walked away. I closed the door and finally broke down. For weeks, I blamed myself. Maybe I wasn't beautiful enough anymore. Maybe I wasn't the same woman he married. Maybe becoming a mother had changed me too much. But slowly, I began to understand something. I had not failed. I had simply given everything I had to someone who had decided to stop giving back. I became a single mother. Some nights were incredibly hard. There were nights when the baby cried and I cried with her. There were mornings when I felt like I had no strength left. But every time I looked at my daughter's face, I found another reason to get up. I started rebuilding my life. I went back to work. I learned how to manage everything on my own. I became stronger not because I wanted to, but because my daughter needed me. Months passed, then years. One afternoon, my daughter came running toward me after school. "Mommy," she wrapped her arms around my waist. I hugged her tightly, and in that moment, I realized something. The family I thought I had lost was not gone. It had simply changed. My daughter and I had built our own little family. One evening, I found an old photograph from the day she was born. There I was, young, tired, emotional, and still believing my marriage would last forever. I looked at that woman and wanted to tell her something. "You're going to survive. You're going to cry. You're going to struggle. But one day, you're going to smile again." I put the photograph away and looked at my daughter sleeping peacefully. My husband had divorced me after our first baby. For a long time, I thought that was the end of my story. But I was wrong. It was only the end of one chapter. Because sometimes, the person who walks away from you doesn't destroy your future. Sometimes, their leaving gives you the space to discover who you really are, and that little girl who changed my life. She wasn't the reason my marriage ended. She was the reason I found the courage to begin again. And for the first time in years, I wasn't asking, why did he leave me? I was asking something much more important. Where do I want to go from here?
And this time I knew the answer.
Forward,